I never told my daughter what I kept inside Storage Unit 7. When she married a smooth-talking fraud who thought he could outsmart a retired old woman, I made sure he would never find what he was really looking for. But while I was sitting in my kitchen nursing a cup of black coffee, my storage facility manager called me in a dead panic. "Ma'am, your son-in-law just pulled up in the parking lot. He's got a crowbar and he brought 2 men with him." I did not panic. I had been waiting for exactly this moment, and what I did next brought his entire carefully constructed lie crashing down around him. If you are connecting with my story, friends, please hit the like button and subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is there. It genuinely warms my heart to know which corner of this country is listening to me tonight. It was a Tuesday evening in early October, the kind of evening where the air turns sharp and the sky goes dark faster than you expect. I was sitting alone at my kitchen table in my house outside of Charlotte, North Carolina, the same table where my husband Raymond and I had eaten 31 years of dinners together. I am Margaret Sutton. I am 67 years old. I spent my career as a registered nurse, and for the last 18 years, alongside that career, I quietly built a small but profitable chain of climate-controlled storage facilities on the eastern edge of the city. People look at me now and see a soft-spoken retired grandmother with reading glasses and a vegetable garden. They do not see the woman who negotiated commercial leases at midnight, who managed contractors through 3 facility expansions, and who survived the kind of loss that either breaks you or sharpens you into something harder than you were before. Raymond passed 4 years ago. Lung cancer. 18 months from diagnosis to the end. Before he died, he held my hand in that same hospital where I had spent 30 years caring for other people's families, and he told me one thing. He said, "Maggie, nobody is ever going to take care of our girl the way you will. Trust your gut. You always know." I intended to keep that promise. My daughter Claire is 34 years old. She teaches 3rd grade at an elementary school 20 minutes from my house. She has Raymond's eyes and his patience, and his stubborn belief that people are fundamentally good. She brought Nathan Cole home for the first time 14 months ago. He was 41, broad-shouldered, and spoke with the practiced confidence of a man who had rehearsed every sentence before he said it. He told me he was a regional director for a medical device company. He drove a black SUV that still smelled like the dealer lot. He shook my hand and called me Mrs. Sutton, and told me my home was beautiful. My gut said something else entirely. The first alarm went off on a Sunday afternoon, 3 months into Claire and Nathan's engagement. We were having lunch at a restaurant near my house, the 4 of us, and Nathan was doing what Nathan always did, which was talk. He talked about quarterly projections and regional market share and an upcoming conference in Dallas. Claire watched him the way people watch a fireplace, warm and content, not noticing how much wood is actually burning. Then he leaned back in his chair, swirled his sweet tea, and looked at me with a casual smile that did not reach his eyes. "Margaret," he said, "I was actually driving past your storage complex on Meridian Road last week. I had a client near that industrial park. I didn't realize how big the operation was." I set down my fork, very slowly, very deliberately. I have never advertised my facilities under my own name. The LLC registered to that property is listed under a holding company named Raymond, and I chose 20 years ago. There is no sign on the fence with my name on it. There is no reason a medical device sales director would be researching industrial property records in his spare time unless he was hunting for something specific. "Just a few old buildings," I said pleasantly, letting a slightly confused smile cross my face. "Nothing exciting. Raymond always said I held on to things longer than I should." Nathan smiled back. "Prime real estate, though. That whole corridor is being redeveloped. You're probably sitting on more value than you realize. I actually know some commercial developers who work in that zip code." I looked at my daughter. She was beaming at him. I picked up my fork and changed the subject. That night, I sat in Raymond's old armchair in the living room, and I thought about what my gut had been quietly saying for 3 months. I thought about the small inconsistencies I had filed away and never examined. The way Nathan always deflected when Claire mentioned visiting his family in Ohio. The way he paid for nothing, ever, allowing Claire to cover dinner and groceries and the deposit on their apartment with such smooth naturalness that she seemed to think it was a mutual arrangement. The way his eyes moved around a room before he sat down in it, calculating, measuring. I thought about what Raymond had told me from that hospital bed. The next morning, I called my property manager, a man named Gerald who had worked for me for 11 years and who I trusted with my life. I told him I needed new exterior cameras installed on the Meridian Road facility before the end of the week. I told him to document every vehicle that entered the outer parking lot, day or night. I told him to call me personally if Nathan Cole's black SUV ever appeared on that footage. Gerald asked no questions. He said, "Done by Thursday, miss." Sutton. 2 weeks later, Nathan arrived at my house on a Saturday morning, carrying a leather portfolio and a tray of coffee. Claire was beside him, and her expression told me she already knew what he was about to say and had already decided it was a wonderful idea. He sat across from me at the kitchen table and opened the portfolio with practiced efficiency. "Margaret, I've been doing some research on your behalf," he began, his voice warm and earnest and precisely calibrated. "I know you've been managing those storage properties alone since Raymond passed, and as someone who works in business development, it genuinely concerns me to see you carrying that burden. The Meridian Road property in particular, the land value alone has gone up significantly in the past 2 years. I have a contact at a commercial real estate group who would pay very well for that parcel. Clean transaction, no public listing, cash offer. I can handle the entire process for you." He slid a glossy printout across the table. It showed an aerial photograph of my Meridian Road facility with the acreage highlighted in yellow. I picked it up. I studied it with the slightly overwhelmed expression of a woman who does not understand spreadsheets. I asked a few soft, confused questions about what cash offer meant and whether I would need a lawyer. Nathan assured me warmly that he could handle all of it, that I would barely need to do a thing, that he just needed me to sign a limited authorization document allowing him to negotiate on my behalf. I told him I never signed anything without sleeping on it first. Raymond had always said so. Nathan's smile stayed exactly in place, but something behind his eyes shifted by a fraction. Impatience. Hunger. The look of a man who is running out of time. Claire squeezed his hand and told me there was no pressure. But she looked at me the way people look at someone who is being unnecessarily slow, and that look hurt more than anything Nathan had said. I walked them to the door and hugged my daughter and watched Nathan guide her down my front steps with his hand on the small of her back. I stood in the doorway until his SUV disappeared around the corner. Then I went back inside, sat down at Raymond's desk, and called a woman named Sandra Briggs. Sandra had done investigative work for my attorney for years. She was quiet, methodical, and thorough. I told her I needed everything she could find on a man named Nathan Cole and any company he claimed to work for. I told her to start with the medical device firm and work outward from there. "How fast do you need this?" she asked. "As fast as you can move," I said. Sandra called me back in 6 days. I drove to her office and sat across from her while she opened a folder the way a doctor opens test results, carefully, watching your face. Nathan Cole had been terminated from the medical device company 8 months ago. Not laid off. Terminated, for cause, following an internal audit of his expense accounts. He had been submitting fraudulent reimbursement claims for 2 years. The company had declined to press charges in exchange for a quiet separation agreement, which meant there was no public record. There was also a civil judgment from 3 years prior. A former business partner in Columbus, Ohio had sued him for $180,000 over a failed investment venture that turned out to be essentially a personal loan Nathan had never repaid. The judgment had gone to collections. Nathan had declared personal bankruptcy, had the judgment discharged, and then resurfaced in Charlotte 18 months later, presenting himself as a successful regional director. He currently had no income that Sandra could verify. His SUV was leased and 3 payments behind. His apartment, the one Claire had helped him furnish, had a co-signer on the lease. The co-signer was my daughter. I sat in Sandra's office for a long time after she finished speaking. My hands were folded in my lap. My face was still. Inside my chest, there was a cold, rolling fury that I recognized from the worst nights of Raymond's illness. The particular anger of someone who loves a person they cannot fully protect, who has to watch the harm come anyway, and calculate how to minimize it. I thanked Sandra, took the folder, and drove home. I did not call Claire. I knew exactly what would happen if I called Claire. Nathan had spent over a year building himself a fortress inside my daughter's trust. He had made himself indispensable to her daily life, to her finances, to her sense of the future. If I walked in with a folder of documents and told her the man she loved was a fraud, he would turn it against me before the afternoon was over. I had watched him perform. I knew how good he was. He would cry. He would be wounded. He would tell her I had never accepted him, that I was a controlling mother who could not let go, and Claire, who wanted so badly to believe in her own judgment, would defend him with everything she had. I was not going to give him that opportunity. I needed Nathan to destroy himself. I needed Claire to see it with her own eyes, without my hands anywhere near the result. I went home, sat at Raymond's desk, and I started building a trap. The first piece was the document. I spent 2 evenings crafting a facility assessment letter on my own company letterhead, the kind an operations director might prepare for an internal review. I described Storage Unit 7 at the Meridian Road property as the current holding location for a contracted medical cold chain logistics partnership with a regional blood bank network. According to the document, Unit 7 contained temperature-controlled pharmaceutical storage equipment, proprietary transport containers, and confidential chain-of-custody materials. I listed the estimated replacement value of the contents at $340,000. I marked the document "Confidential Internal Use Only" in red across the top, and noted that the partnership was operating under a non-disclosure agreement with the healthcare network. None of it was true. Unit 7 was empty. What was true, and what Nathan had no way of knowing, was what the Meridian Road facility actually was. 5 years ago, I had been quietly approached by the county's Regional Emergency Management Office. My facility sat on a specific corridor that made it logistically valuable for something the county needed very badly, but could not publicly advertise. The eastern section of my Meridian Road property, the last 3 units, including Unit 7, had been quietly leased to a federally contracted emergency supply chain operation. In plain language, those units were used as a regional staging depot for disaster relief supply chains coordinated through FEMA's Southeastern Logistics Network. From the outside, the facility looked like any other modest storage complex. Faded paint, chain-link perimeter, a hand-lettered sign on the gate. But the interior of the eastern section had been quietly retrofitted. The walls were reinforced. The alarm systems were federal-grade, wired directly to a monitoring center that notified both local law enforcement and federal contract security simultaneously. There were 2 on-site federal security contractors stationed in a control room inside the building during all operational hours. Unauthorized access triggered not a local police dispatch, but a federal response protocol. I had never told Claire any of this. There was no reason to. It was a quiet, profitable arrangement that required nothing from her and that I intended to leave to her intact someday, along with everything else. Nathan wanted Unit 7. I was going to give him a clear path straight to it. The second piece was the placement. I kept a fireproof filing cabinet in my home office. Nathan had been inside that room twice, and both times I had noticed his eyes move to the cabinet with the specific attention of a man cataloging assets. I placed the fabricated document in the second drawer, tucked between 2 folders of genuine utility invoices. I left the corner of the red confidential stamp just barely visible above the folder tab, just enough to be found by someone who was already looking. The third piece was the invitation. 3 days after I set the document in place, I called Claire and told her I had been thinking about Nathan's proposal. I said I was still not ready to sign anything, but I had pulled some of the facility paperwork, and I thought it might help Nathan understand the full picture if he could come over and look through it with me. Claire's voice on the phone was warm with relief. She told me this was exactly what she had been hoping for. She said Nathan would be so happy to hear I was opening up. They came on a Friday evening. I made dinner. I listened to Nathan talk about the commercial real estate market with a focused, engaged expression that masked everything I was actually thinking. After dinner, I showed him the filing cabinet. I opened the top drawer, showed him some routine property tax documents, and then said I had a few more folders to pull together and asked if he could give me a moment. I left him alone in the office for 4 minutes. When I came back, he was exactly where I expected him to be, standing casually 2 feet from the cabinet, his posture a fraction too relaxed. I had installed a small recording device in the bookshelf the day before, the kind that looks like a hardcover book spine. I had tested the angle twice. Over the following week, I watched him work. He texted me twice with gentle follow-up questions about the property assessment timeline. He told Claire that he was concerned my facilities were underinsured and offered to review my coverage. He was patient. He was pleasant. He was very, very careful. But he was running out of time. I could feel it in the increasing frequency of his contact, the slight edge that had begun to enter his voice when I gave him soft, non-committal answers. Sandra confirmed it the following Monday. Nathan had borrowed $90,000 from a private individual in Charleston, a man with a history of predatory lending and at least 2 prior civil cases for collection intimidation. The loan had been made 11 months ago, and Nathan was significantly past the repayment deadline. The lender had begun making contact. Nathan was not looking for a business opportunity. He was looking for a lifeline, and he thought he had found one in a retired grandmother with a storage complex and no one to advise her. 2 weeks later, I placed a second piece of bait. I left my personal tablet on the kitchen counter when Nathan came over for Sunday dinner. The screen was showing an email I had drafted from a fictional logistics consultant, addressed to me, confirming that the cold chain contract at Meridian Road was up for renewal and that the pharmaceutical contents of Unit 7 would be relocated within 60 days if the lease was not extended. The implication was clear to anyone reading it. The valuable contents were there now, but not for long. I left to check on something in the backyard. I was outside for 6 minutes. When I came back, Nathan was standing in the exact spot I had left him, but the tablet screen had been moved and the email had been scrolled down to the bottom. He smiled at me and asked if I needed any help with the dishes. I smiled back and said I was just fine. The following Thursday, Gerald called me. Nathan's SUV had been in the outer parking lot of the Meridian Road facility twice in the past 4 days, both times late in the evening, both times for approximately 40 minutes. On the second visit, a second vehicle had been parked alongside his gray cargo van with no visible plates. I drove to Sandra's office that afternoon. I gave her everything I had and told her to put it together into a single, clean file. The fraudulent employment history, the bankruptcy, the unpaid civil judgment, the predatory lender, the surveillance footage of the parking lot, the recording from my home office bookshelf, which had captured Nathan opening the filing cabinet drawer, removing the fabricated document, photographing it on his phone, and replacing it. I held that file in my hands for a moment before I put it in my bag. Then I called my daughter. I did not tell her everything on the phone. I told her I needed her to come with me on Friday night. I told her I had found something that belonged to her father, something I had been meaning to show her, and that I needed to do it in person. Claire heard the weight in my voice and did not push back. She said she would be at my house by noon. When she arrived, I was already in my coat. I told her we needed to take a short drive. She climbed into the passenger seat of my car and asked where we were going. I told her to be patient. I told her that some things could only be understood when you saw them for yourself. We parked in the shadow of a delivery bay across the street from the Meridian Road facility at 10:45 at night. The complex looked the way it always looked after hours: dark, quiet, unremarkable. A few amber security lights along the fence line. No movement. I turned to my daughter. I held her hand, and I told her the truth about Nathan Cole. I did not soften it. I told her about the termination, the bankruptcy, the private loan, the fabricated credentials. I watched the color leave her face in stages, the way light leaves a room when someone draws the curtains one panel at a time. She shook her head twice. She started to say his name, and stopped. I told her that Nathan believed Storage Unit 7 contained $340,000 worth of pharmaceutical cold chain equipment belonging to a medical network, and that he had photographed a document from my home office to confirm it, and that based on the surveillance footage from this week, he was planning to access the facility tonight, and that he had brought someone with him at least once already. I handed her my tablet, showing her the parking lot footage. She stared at the image of Nathan's SUV, parked in the dark outside her mother's business. She did not speak. I told her that what Nathan did not know was what was actually inside Unit 7. I told her about the Federal Emergency Logistics Contract. I told her about the monitoring system, the security contractors, and the federal response protocol that would activate the moment an unauthorized person crossed the perimeter of the eastern section. Claire looked up at me. Her eyes were filled with tears, but they were not soft tears. They were the kind that come from fury and grief arriving at the same moment. I told her to watch the screen. At 11:17, Nathan's SUV turned slowly into the outer parking lot, without its headlights on. The gray cargo van followed 30 seconds behind. 2 men climbed out of the van. They walked to the fence line with Nathan. I watched my daughter watch her fiancé crouch in the dark beside a storage facility fence with 2 strangers, checking something on his phone, pointing toward the eastern section. I activated the audio on my external cameras. The parabolic microphones were not perfect at that distance, but they were clear enough. We heard Nathan's voice, low and confident, telling the men the lock sequence, telling them the unit was unwatched overnight, telling them the equipment could be loaded and gone before dawn. We heard one of the other men ask about the owner. We heard Nathan say, "She's a 67-year-old retired nurse. She has no idea what she's sitting on." Claire made a sound beside me that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. It was not a sob. It was something quieter and more permanent than that. Nathan cut the outer fence latch with bolt cutters and moved toward the eastern section entrance. He punched the code, the one from my fabricated document, into the keypad beside the reinforced door. The door accepted it. It began to roll open. He took one step inside. The response was immediate and total. Flood lamps ignited across the entire eastern perimeter, turning the black lot into something closer to noon than midnight. A federal alarm tone, not a local siren, but the deep, resonant kind that belongs to systems designed to be heard 3 blocks away, began to cycle from the rooftop. Before Nathan could take a second step, 2 federal contract security officers moved out of the building's interior in full tactical gear, weapons raised, commanding him to stop and put his hands where they could be seen. The 2 men from the van ran. They did not make it to the fence. Nathan did not run. His legs stopped working. He stood in the entrance of that building with his hands in the air, the bolt cutters at his feet, and he began to cry. Not quietly, loudly, the kind of crying that has no dignity in it at all. We could hear him through the speakers, telling the officers it was a misunderstanding, telling them he was just checking on something for his mother-in-law, telling them he had the wrong building. The officers were not interested in his explanations. Claire reached over and closed the cover on my tablet. She sat for a moment in the dark of my car with her hands folded in her lap. Then she looked at me, and I saw something in her expression I recognized from when she was a little girl and had just learned something about the world that could not be unlearned. The grief of it, the clarity of it, both at once. "Let's go home, Mom," she said. We drove back through the empty streets of Charlotte without speaking. I made tea when we got in. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where we had eaten 1,000 meals, and I held my daughter's hands and let her cry for as long as she needed to. At 2 in the morning, her phone rang from an unknown number. She put it on speaker. The automated voice from the county detention center offered to connect her to an inmate. She looked at me. I nodded. Nathan's voice came through the speaker, thin and frantic, and entirely unrecognizable as the man who had sat at that table telling us about quarterly projections. He told Claire it was all a terrible mistake. He told her he had been set up. He told her the loan was almost paid off and this was all temporary and she had to get him out before Monday because he had meetings that week he absolutely could not miss. Claire listened without interrupting him. When he paused, she said, "I know about the termination, Nathan. I know about the bankruptcy and the lender in Charleston and the judgment in Columbus. I know what you photographed in my mother's office." Her voice was very steady. "Don't call me again." She pressed end. She set the phone face down on the table. I covered her hand with mine and did not say a single word. Raymond would have done the same. The weeks that followed were hard in the way that honest reckoning is always hard. Claire hired an attorney. The engagement was dissolved. The lease co-signature was the most complicated piece. But Sandra's documentation gave Claire's attorney more than enough to work with. Nathan faced federal trespassing charges and a weapons charge related to one of the men from the van. The private lender in Charleston, apparently having grown tired of waiting, filed his own civil complaint within days of the arrest, which added considerably to Nathan's troubles. He was not going anywhere comfortable anytime soon. 3 weeks after that night, I drove Claire to my attorney's office in uptown Charlotte. She sat beside me in the same leather chair where I had signed my first commercial property lease 22 years ago, while Raymond sat in the other chair squeezing my hand and telling me we could do this. I reached into my coat pocket and placed a single key on the desk between us. Claire looked at it. She asked me what it was for. I told her that Raymond and I had established a protected family trust in her name the year before he was diagnosed. The Meridian Road property, along with the federal contract and 2 of the other facilities, were already titled inside that trust. They had been for 4 years. Nathan had spent months trying to get access to an asset that had never legally been his to reach. Not even if I had signed every document he put in front of me. The key was to a safe deposit box at a bank downtown, where the original trust documents and the deed certificates were held. Claire picked up the key and held it in her palm, and she started to cry. But this time it was a different kind of crying entirely. I pulled her close and held on. Outside the window, Charlotte was going about its Tuesday morning, indifferent and ordinary and beautiful. I told her that her father had said to trust my gut. I told her that my gut had never been wrong about anyone I loved. That evening, I sat on my back porch in the cool October air with a cup of tea, and Raymond's old cardigan pulled around my shoulders, the one I still keep on the hook by the kitchen door. The sky was going that deep blue it goes just before full dark, the color Raymond always called the most honest part of the day. I raised my cup toward that sky. I kept my promise, I said quietly, to no one anyone else could see. Nobody takes what we built. Nobody gets close enough to hurt her, not while I'm still standing. Greed is a particular kind of blindness, friends. It makes a man so focused on what he wants to take that he never stops to look carefully at what he is walking into. When you move through life wearing a mask, performing success you do not have, hunting the kindness of people who trust you, the mask always slips. It always does. And the quiet, steady people you underestimated are usually the ones holding the camera when it happens. Never mistake a soft voice for an empty one. Some of us spent our whole lives building something worth protecting, and we learned a long time ago exactly how to protect it. If this story moved you, friends, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Have you ever had to protect someone you love from a person who was not what they claimed to be? Share your story in the comments. I read every single one. The most powerful protection we can offer the people we love is not money or property. It is the quiet, steady habit of paying attention. Margaret never raised her voice. She never panicked. She simply watched, listened, and trusted the instinct that decades of loving Raymond had sharpened inside her. If someone in your life is making you feel like your careful judgment is a burden, trust what you already know. A small note for you: this story was created and fictionalized by AI, crafted to bring you an entertaining listen while leaving you with something genuinely worth carrying forward.